Real quick disclaimer. So please watch this video if you are thinking about purchasing this saw or if you already own this saw. I think there's going to be a couple of things in here that's going to help you make a better purchasing decision. There's going to be some tips and tricks in this video to help you get the most out of it. Thank you. Now let's get to the video. Hi guys, it's Alex from knifepointgear. So I wanted to do a frequently asked questions video today, and I think what we're going to do is end up getting into some tips and tricks on how to use our backpacking saw. So this saw is going to be for someone who does high mileage, who carries their gear most of the time, and weight is going to be the biggest priority. This saw was designed for one thing and one thing only, and that is weight, without sacrificing a lot of performance. This is still a fully capable, usable saw. A lot of the places where I backpack along the Appalachian Trail and whatnot, they're relatively high use areas. Most of the places are just absolutely picked clean of everything that you can break with your hands, and having a saw really comes in handy in those situations, because otherwise you're going to again be walking around the woods looking for sticks to break with your hands, and that's a lot of work and a lot of time. I just want to get right to it, make a couple cuts so I can have a fire. If that sounds like your style, then this saw is probably going to be for you. If, however, you plan on going out and setting up a base camp for a week, you are going to have a giant bonfire type thing, and you're going to be processing lots and lots of firewood, then something more along the lines of this is probably going to be up your alley. I'm still not a big fan of these, but again, it's a little more ergonomic to use, and it's a little bit quicker just because it's, you know, a much larger, more capable saw. That's not to say that this saw isn't capable of doing that kind of work. It's just going to be used a little bit differently, if you know what I mean. Why don't you include a tensioning rod with the saw, which they're referring to this piece right here? One of the reasons is weight. We don't want to carry any unnecessary weight, and this is something that you can find right off the, the forest floor. Pick it up and use it as a tensioning rod. It might take you, I don't know, 30 seconds to use. You could even, once you find a good one, carry it with you. It's just, in my opinion, it's not necessary. It would add even more cost to something that's really expensive to produce. And again, it's just not needed. The other nice thing about this is we would have to include something that is a little bit smaller, more compact, again, to stay with the whole weight thing. And you can use a larger stick like this. I like to use something about the width of my thumb. That seems to be the perfect size there. And what this does is it actually gives you a T-handle or a stop on the back of the saw. Something really nice and large to grab a hold to, and this really makes a big difference. Next question. Can't read my own writing. That's one of the questions we get all the time, is how long is this little string here going to last? The string here is, I think the brand name is isnt. It is the 2.2 millimeter line. Has a 650 pound breaking strength, if I'm not mistaken. It will not break under normal use. I've tied this thing to the vise and dropped weights on it, giant 60, 120 pound weights, and I've not been able to get the string to break with a blade on the saw. Actually, the weak point in the saw is the cotter pin that holds the blade here. That will actually bend backwards inside the saw, and the saw will come apart like that, so it won't actually break. Now, one of the places that you will probably see some wear on this is where the stick comes through the loop. Eventually you'll get some wear on the string here, as well as where it comes in contact with this metal end cap here. I'm still using one of my original tensioning lines, and it's been tensioned, hundreds of times, maybe even thousands at this point, and it's definitely showing some wear, but it hasn't broken yet. And that is the smaller, I think 1.7 millimeter line, which has a 400 pound breaking strength. So it will wear out eventually, and you'll need to get a new one. If you do end up breaking one or worried about it or whatever, just send us an email and we'll send you some new. Does the blade rotate in the collar? The answer is no, if you tension it properly. Sort of the secret here, is we're giving away all of our secrets, is this collar here, we call it the blade insert. It's actually a precision machine to the 1,000th of an inch, and that's actually really crucial in how the blade is supported in the saw. And if it was any wider or lesser of a tolerance, it wouldn't work as well. So because this is such a precise fit, when the blade goes in, there's no blade wobble. There's really no blade wobble up and down or a whole lot back and forth. And again, that comes back to the precision machining that we do on these things. We'll go ahead and put this all together, and then what we want to do is, once this is tensioned up nice and tight, this absolutely won't rotate. We have sort of a ramp on the blade, the way that they're designed, and that really does hold it in there securely. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I have a hard time showing on the video. Another thing that we gotta mention here is the tension on the the T handle, the tensioning portion. It needs to be fairly tight. Don't be afraid to sort of crank this down a good bit and tighten this bad boy up, because if it's too loose, if you just kind of put a little 2-finger thing like that, you might get a little bit of blade play back and forth. But if you tighten this thing down nice and tight, that issue kind of goes away. You don't want to crank it down like gorilla tight, just like that. Just nice and tight and firm, and hopefully your tensioning stick is good to go. That's why I like to choose something about as wide as my thumb. Maybe you have big thumbs, maybe you have small thumbs, but that seems to be a good general rule of thumb. Another question that I actually got last night was, does the stick tend to unwind as you're using it? And the answer is no, if it's tensioned nice and tight and it's tensioned properly. The other reason is that as you're holding the saw, I like to hold the saw with my backhand sort of like this, and that holds the stick from unwinding. So not only does that give you the extra grip to pull back on the blade, but again, it keeps the blade from unwinding. The reason that this is stepped here like this on the back is so that it sort of bites into the wood a little bit and prevents that from happening. So had some questions about why we don't cut grooves in the back here, and that is, for one reason, is to keep excess wear from happening on the tensioning line. I've never had a problem with the stick unwinding if you tighten it down nice and tight like so. First thing is, this is literally made out of some of the most expensive materials that we can source. This is real carbon fiber. It's made for us by a factory here in the United States. These are precision machined components. They are literally machined one by one. They're not stamped out or anything like that. They are very precisely to the thousandth of an inch machine. They have to be, because everything is such a precise fit. These pieces, these custom machine pieces, are very expensive. We've got 2 of them, and then we have carbon fiber, which is again very expensive. The blade is the only portion that I think is not expensive. These, what's nice about this saw is that it takes cheap, easily replaceable blades. This will take anything that is a regular Sawzall blade. So replacement blade cost with the blade that we sell it at is anywhere from, depending on where you live, $10 to even $16. Again, depending on where you live. Yeah, that's a lot cheaper than some of the $30 to $40 replacement blade costs from some of these other saws. So the part that matters, the part that's actually gonna wear out, the blade, is cheap. And again, along that point, these blades last a very, very, very long time if they're used properly. These have carbide teeth on them. They won't round over, they won't fall off, they won't break off unless you're doing something crazy with it. I'm still using my original test blade at this point, which has thousands and thousands of cuts on it. And I'm not joking about that. It literally does have thousands of cuts on it, and it still performs exactly the same. It may be bent here or there, I've straightened it, but it still cuts exactly the same as it did new. Is it the sharpest blade in the world? No, but it doesn't have to be, in my opinion. It'll make rip cuts, it'll make cross cuts, it'll do pretty much anything you want it to do with exactly the same performance, no matter how old or new the blade is. So that's the nice thing about this blade. Why don't you make the blade fit inside the handle? Okay, so that's a good question. I actually did make a version where the blade, one of my original versions, had the blade fit inside the handle. It wasn't shaped exactly like this, and I don't even know what I did with it at this point. Otherwise, I'd show you. I probably used it for something else. But the reason that we don't do that is for weight. We want the lightest saw possible, and to make it so that the blade fits inside the handle, you have to make the handle significantly bigger as well as significantly longer. And that's the reason that we don't do that. You know, along those same lines with the weight, in order for the blade to still insert, you know, because we have an exact size here, we can't change this. We can, however, change this, but with a larger diameter tube, in order for this to fit in here, we'd need a lot more metal around the outside. It would make the saw, it would just make the saw overall a lot heavier. And again, that's not what we originally designed the saw for. Now, that's not to say that I don't have a design where this blade does fit inside the handle, because I do. I just haven't made it yet. So again, that's why we didn't do that, is for the whole weight issue. So about the tensioning line, everybody wants to know why we're using a tensioning line, why we didn't make something where the blade fits into the insert and we have a pin or a collar or something like that in order for the blade to attach. So there's a couple of reasons. Again, I had several versions that actually did exactly that. They had a little pin that went in on a spring that held the blade in place. We had grooves cut out to go in. We had a bunch of different versions of this, but we ended up running into the same problem. In order to make the saw fit in here and get rid of this line, you have to have a relatively complex mechanism up here on this end. For one, that adds a lot of cost. It also adds a lot of weight because we have to add a lot more steel up here in this end in order to make this whole thing work. The other issue with that is that, let's say we get rid of this tensioning line here. So if we had something that that was just like this, so you slip the blade in, you had a little rotating collar or a pin that you put in, this is what the saw would look like. So that looks well and great and all that, except for the fact that you lose one of the most functional items on the saw, in my opinion. And what makes this saw a much more capable saw is you lose that T-handle on the back. This is, again, it's free weight. You don't have to carry this. And it gives you a lot more grip on the back. You lose this completely, and now all you're left with is just a tube here. You don't have anything back here for your hand to stop against. Now, that's not to say that the handle is slippery, which we'll get to in a second, but again, you do lose one of the most functional parts of this saw, which is that T-handle. In my humble opinion, I don't think that that would be the best idea to get rid of the string. Now about the cotter pin. A lot of people ask about this cotter pin. This is, I guess, sort of the DIY kind of look on this saw. A lot of people ask about this. Why don't we have an actual piece for this made? We will. We're working on it as we speak. We're going to have a replacement piece made for this, and if you've already bought one, if and when that happens, we'll send replacement pieces for everybody out here that'll allow you to change the blade without bending a cotter pin and all that good stuff. When I originally made this saw, I did not intend it to be made for sale. I ended up having a friend who wanted one, so I made one for them with some leftover stuff that I had, and then they had a friend, and so on and so forth, and then we decided to offer it for sale. We weren't sure if there was a big interest in it. Turns out there was, so we are having these pieces made at this point. So another question, why did we make this out of carbon fiber, not something cheaper like plastic or aluminum or something like that? So carbon fiber is actually a really cool material because it is extremely stiff and it's also extremely light. So with this saw, with the tension and the tensioning string sort of pulling everything together, you actually need that stiffness. That's why you can't make this version out of PVC pipe. Don't do that, please. It's very dangerous if you make it out of PVC pipe. The blade will break off and you will hurt yourself. Don't ask me how I know. Carbon fiber solves that issue. It's definitely strong enough to support the tension that's needed to hold this thing together. It's stiff enough, it won't bend. You can stand on this thing, you won't break it. That's why we offer a lifetime warranty on it. Carbon fiber is also really cool in the fact that it's relatively grippy, especially with the roll wrapped carbon fiber like we're using here. It sort of has a snakeskin pattern. I'm not sure if that's the correct terminology to use, but these are individual carbon strands that are wrapped around the tube like this, and that provides grip in this direction. Hopefully you can hear that. And less in this direction. So we orientate, is that the correct word? The saw, when the blade is in there, to give you the grip to pull this thing back. So it's a fairly grippy saw. I know it doesn't look like it, but it is fairly grippy without adding any other grip tape or any other plastic or anything like that. Also, grip I don't think is an issue with our tensioning thing, tensioning stick in the back. Super technical here. You know, again, this thing adds a ton of grip, and it's sort of the maybe the defining feature of this saw is the fact that you do have that T-handle grip on the back of the saw that you can use to make it a little bit more comfortable. And I want to reiterate this. This is not for someone who is going to be cutting cords and cord to firewood. You can do that if you need to, but you know, there are more comfortable saw options out there. They're just going to be a lot more heavy. So I think that that is all of the major questions so far. So something I forgot here real quick is, please don't think that I'm trying to sell you on this saw, because that is absolutely not what I'm trying to do. All I'm showing you in all of these videos is what this saw is technically capable of doing. I'm really not showing you the exact purpose of what this saw was built for, which is to be carried the vast majority of the time, and then used to make a couple of small cuts rather than breaking sticks like a caveman in order to make a fire. The last thing that I want to do is to have the wrong person purchase this saw and be unhappy with it because they misunderstood what this saw's intentions are actually for. This saw is designed to be the lightest possible saw that you can buy, and that's all. And as far as I know, there's not a saw that's lighter that has the same cutting capability as this saw currently available for sale. If you know of one that's lighter, more powerful, let me know and we'll do a test. So I think that about wraps everything up. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, which, by the way, is going to be an interesting video.